Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Let's start the last act of CPDP LatAm 2025. My name is Nicolas Ingales. For those who haven't met me in the last 2 days, we were here trying to coordinate a lot of workshops. I can say that it was a record breaking event. We had the biggest number of enrolled people enrolled to the event. And now we have a list of excellent panelists with us to present a luxury wide of perspectives about the topics today, that is understanding the value of data in the perspective of the global south. And one thing that is implicit in this title is that we need to understand how this data value and the benefits of this value can go to those who deserve it. And this is the cornerstone of this discussion. Our speakers today include Armando Mansueta, Vice Minister for Digital Dominican Republic, Ahmad Binder, Director of Digital Intelligence of Digital Cooperation Organization, Maria Kask from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Estonia, also Head of Freedom Online Coalition, Yasodara Cordova, Member of the Investment Board, Member of Co-Develop, Fernanda Melchior, substituting in the last minutes Alessandro Lombardi from Eleia Digital Data Centers, Pablo Segura, Data Privacy Director of Mercado Livre, Cecilia Rickup, Professor of University College of London, and Director of the Institute for Public Purpose, Maria Paz Hermosillo, Professor of University Adolfo Ibanez, and of GoPlab as well. And before we start the discussion, I want to share a brief perspective about the importance of linking economic and social value. I forgot to say I will pass the floor next to our colleague moderator, Professor Laura Chet Mendes from IDP. When you talk about values, this term is connected to the meaning of economic value and the social values. And many times, these two things are not together. And there are some problems when we don't have supervision that aligns the social values and the way that economic values are produced. And many times this generates situations that we have an excessive data collection or unfair conditions that are imposed in the data treatment. And usually the companies have as objective to maximize their profits, to minimize their costs. And in search for efficiency, they can sacrifice the social values eventually. And this situation happens when we have a situation of control, infrastructure and technological control over the data that allows us to impose conditions that goes beyond the economically or socially acceptable. And these situations in economy is called the economic arena. So when a producer sets a price that is over the average, over what is acceptable, we need to try to identify these bottlenecks and to align the values that is being produced economically to those that the society wants to pursue. Therefore, it's important to understand the society, how the value is created, because otherwise we are going to stimulate a system that creates more economic income and tends to strengthen the companies that have the infrastructural control, and it will create more differences and more inequalities in society. I just want to say that society nowadays in many different jurisdictions is trying to face this problem with a legal framework of data economy, some bills of law about intervention in digital markets, and many proposals were made in the past for a privatization of the data approach. There is a bill of law on the general law of data empowerment that would create an obligation for the providers to provide an electronic portfolio where the data holders can receive compensation in exchange of the data that they are allowing access to. This is another way to implement the lessons of Lawrence Lessig that used to say that law alone does not bring the solution. We need to complement with technological tools and social norms and incentives to the market. However, this attempt of privatization of data does not solve the problems here for three reasons. First, because the value that is created by one data holder or one consumer is too little compared to the group of data that can be collected in society. So when we have this individualized exchange, that gives a smaller value than what the company is perceiving. Second place, the data is relational. So sometimes when you give access to your data, you are also revealing something about something else, somebody else, and this value is not perceived in this individualized exchange in the market. The third reason is that these dynamics ends up creating more division in the society. Those that do not allow just to the sale of their data, or for one reason or the other, they end up accepting these conditions. For those reasons, I just want to mention something that was already raised yesterday and in the previous session. There is a discussion paper that CPDP LatAm has launched, and myself with Luca Belli and Professor Gustavo Gustafi and Laila Mikalski, about a collective approach. So we should not focus on the individual transition, but as society, we need to impose some balance to balance the situation of informational and power asymmetry that are in the data treatment relations. So the proposal that we launched is available in the CPDP LatAm website and suggests that the companies that process data over a certain value for commercial purposes, they should give back part of these values to the taxpayers in the country where they collected the data. And this is a little controversial because many times they are foreign companies that come to the country. They collect not only personal data, but they collect data about interactions and observations of the environment and content generated by Brazilian users. And this data that is an asset will generate a profit to these companies, and they are not taxed in the countries. And we are suggesting a different approach. And what we call the data equity. So I encourage everyone to deep dive in our paper that is in the CPDP website and provide us feedbacks. Having said that, I will start the debate. I will pass the floor to my colleague, Professor Laura Mendes. Good evening, everyone. I want to greet everyone present here and many familiar faces and friends in the audience. I want to greet Nicolo, Luca Belli, and all of the organizers of this spectacular conference, all the distinguished panelists, it's an honor to be here with you moderating this panel. I think it's really interesting and it's a critical topic. If you allow me, I just want to speak a few words about the world that we're living in terms of data protection. I think the topics of the conference express really well the time and the moment that we are living. And the data value, starting with the CPDP LatAm, discussing inf public digital infrastructures and the role of the data value is one of the most present and current debates that we are experiencing. And if you allow me, I would make a brief recap. I have been working with this topic for more than 15 years, and I participated along with Professor Danilo Doneda in the elaboration of the data protection reg regulation in 2008 or 2009. And if you could make a brief recap, we have many generations of data protection that is discussed in Europe. But if I could risk what would be the generation of data protection in Brazil, I would say that the first generation starts with the Consumer Defense Codes in 1990 and a little bit before in the Federal Constitution. And we didn't think about self-determination, but in a country that was living dictatorship and a country that was trying to find transparency and data access. This was the mark of our first generation of data protection. The second generation certainly it starts with self-determination and consent. That is something that we see in Europe and other countries as well. I would say that the positive registration and the civil internet framework that brings this concept of self-determination. And then we see in the second generation of data protection the most common concepts that we see in other legislations in Latin America and in the European guidelines and the GDPR. And we have more consent and all the principles of data protection that are more classic. And the third generation is the general data protection regulation with the fundamental rights of recognized by the Supreme Court and the concept of informational self-determination. And what expressed this moment of the third generation, I remember the Constitutional Court in Germany that says that there is no irrelevant personal data. I believe this is the mark of the general data protection regulation and the fundamental rights. And that the idea that we do not only protect private and intimate data, but any personal data deserves some kind of protection. And the current moment that we are living, if we could think about evolution or if we are evolving to a fourth generation here in Brazil, it is the debate that throughout all these years, more than 10 years of discussions, that we tried to protect the data and we tried to consolidate the concept of informational self-determination and the concept of the principle of purpose and the principle of transparency and data safety. Now we are in a different moment, that is, can we extract value from this data, whether they are personal data or non-personal data, without neglecting all the protection framework that was included and that we fought so much in the last 10 years? I think this is the big question that Nicola opens this panel. And another topic that was not a topic of the last 10 years in Brazil and maybe in the last decades in Europe and United States is who holds most of this data. And there is a big discussion about data sovereignty, how to explore this data. Exactly the countries that do not have the platforms and the companies where we have this massive data flow and they detain this data. In this fourth generation, we have discussed data sovereignty and public data infrastructure and how to extract this value of this data without neglecting all this protection structure and how to conciliate this sovereignty and protection with the debates that we had in the last year. I believe this would be a brief introduction complementing what Nicholas said.
And without further ado, I would like to pass the floor to Armando Manzueta, that is Vice Minister for Digital Dominican Republic, and asking him a question about the digital infrastructure because it's a big theme in Brazil, and we have been talking a lot about PICs and about other themes of digital identity. How we are going to search um, this path for the digital sovereignty, and the question that we would like to do is, especially because we know that your ministry is implementing, it's still implementing infrastructure, a public digital infrastructure, and engaging initially with this global digital infrastructures with alliances and GDPI at UN, and translating these structures in concrete services of digital governance. How is it possible to establish this data governance so for them to maintain itself as a public service, especially for marginalized community, guaranteeing the democratic supervision, privacy, and cyber and security, cyber security. And actually, this is a great question. We at the Dominican Republic for some time we are working with this and trying to solve this governance, this data governance, in a way that it makes sense and it can satisfy the population requests, of course, to protect the everything that is valuable. That people's data is their identity. Thinking about this year, just to start to answer this question, we had a data governance regulation that it's focusing in this value of chain. It's how they are going to receive those data, how they are going to storage this and process, and how they protect, how we define these rules, talking about consent, to be able to transform those data and use them for public policies, especially based on scientific evidence. And a second time, especially for public services. And we have other complementary lines that we are working in terms of regulations and legislations that talked about how we are going to guide these processes and what are the practical applications for the public service. For example, a clear example of that is what we start doing with those verticals inside the national architecture. We are working with a program to make it easier, this diligence, to open bank accounts, because one of the problems we have is people that do not have any bank accounts or any informations. The informations we have from people can contribute for the banks for this for this for them to check those documents that are necessary, and we can be this bridge. And of course this cannot be done in any way. We need to follow rules and we need to control. That is not only about this resolutions, because if do not have any technical applications, it's not worth it. So we are working this processing and how we define mechanisms to be able to generate consent, and also key aspects to make sure that those people's data are there, are storage, and are saved, and we have clear rules to be able to use only what is necessary to provide the service. Of course, that this is a way on how we have these commitments and how we are working with the safeguards and VPIs, for example, what we are talking about with the coalition and the freedom that people were talking about earlier, that is going to be focused for to this point, and how we are going to generate this mechanism to make sure the data will be useful to generate public value and also private value, of course, and also for them to have the criteria to make it easier, the fundamental right of the population. Thank you, Armando. I know how important it is to recognize that to minimize the data, it's a value that could should be recognized. The transaction could be understood, and what we want to stimulate with this type of taxation. So when the incentives are just for profits from this data, that the tendency is to maximize the collection of the data. So it's good to see that you have these public experiences to try to stimulate these principles inside the government. Now we are going to the other side of the world. We are going to Asia because we have best practices being implemented. And we're gonna pass the floor for Ahmad Binder, that is the Director of Digital Intelligence of Digital Cooperation Organization. It's an organization that brings many countries together to talk about public digital policies in Asia. And based on your regulatory experience, I will speak in Portuguese, but you're using the translation, okay? So in your work, with your work, that you're calling the member states of the digital cooperation organizations, what are the cooperative instruments that you consider should be prominent to transform these flows, these cross-border flows, to be able to have this shared development? How these different groups can elaborate agreements, multilateral agreements, that will respect that national priorities and at the same time will proportionate inclusion. The floor is yours.
Ele tem uma apresentação, se podemos.
He has a presentation, if you could put it on the screen.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Nicolo. I will speak in English. Please pardon me for that. But really, really thank you, Professor Luca, Professor Nicolo, for this great invitation. 26 hours flight from Riyadh, and all that excitement that comes with it. But this is my second time here. First time was last year. And I was very determined that whenever I get the invitation again, I'm going to be here because this is the most focused group of discussion around the real issues and real challenges and opportunities around data governance. So I congratulate you all for organizing such a great event. Now, so I come from an intergovernmental organization. I do not see a lot of representatives here from intergovernmental organizations. We started 3 years ago, 4 years ago actually. I started working there 3 years ago. And we started with 5 countries coming together and forming the world's first organization to cooperate on digital economy. Now, digital economy itself is huge. And the areas that we explored to cover, to cooperate under, are also quite long. So data we picked up as one of the core elements for the countries to come together on. We grew from 5 member states to 16 member states now. Mr. Nicolo mentioned Asia. So we are Asia, Europe, Africa, South Asia, Middle East, and we are fast growing into the other regions as well. So we identify ourselves as a global organization between the governments. Now, all these regions that I have mentioned here bring a lot of excitement that it's multi-stakeholder in a proper way. However, the diversity of regulations, the diversity of approaches brings a huge challenge. And that is where, when we try to define our scope of work, our scope of cooperation, we have a couple of European countries, we have a couple of Asian countries, we have a huge diversity in terms of political, regulatory maturity for the countries. So it's really a challenge for us to find a way on to touching upon these topics that are very, very relevant for the member states, but still trying to do something meaningful that is acceptable for all. So coming back to this work on data, we picked up cross-border data flows as our focus, and we decided to see what we can do to enhance that cross-border data flows and create so-called digital data or trusted data corridors between the DCO member states. The first thing that we picked up was to look at the economic value that is associated and the social value that is associated to the cross-border data flows. Again, we have talked a lot about the economic value or social value of data itself, but just to bring things into perspective, the data to flow across borders, there is a huge value that has not been quantified very properly, but a couple of studies, for example, OECD in 2022 mentioned that cross-border data flows underpin half of all global trade in services. That was 2 years ago. Then in 2023, a number came up which was 2.8 trillion of the global GDP was associated to cross-border data flows. And then in 2023, another study came from McKinsey associating the estimated that global flows are growing at the rate of 45% annually, which is way outpacing the trade in goods. So the reason on why the cross-border data flows are important was really, really obvious. And when we looked at the DCO member states, of course, from supporting the SMEs to access the cloud services, from enabling cross-border digital services in healthcare and fintech, and participating meaningfully into the AI economy, is something that has really, really put focus on cross-border data flows. Now, so we have determined that we need to do something around it. And there's a shared opportunity, but there are massive challenges. And the challenges are a huge diversity in the regulatory maturity on one hand, and a huge diversity in the objectives of governing data flows on the other hand. We have discussed a lot during these 2 days on the different regimes or different approaches, for example, from fundamental right and data being an extension of humans, and then the regulatory frameworks like GDPR, addressing some of those challenges, to the sovereignty issues, to the data localization inspired by the competition between the local businesses and the international businesses, towards the national security objectives from different member states. And finally, what we have heard a lot is the power imbalances that the government feel at the hand of a few big technology companies. So the vulnerabilities that the global South countries are feeling, that our data is feeding or going in a direction where the benefit is unidirectional. So we published a report a couple of years ago where we looked at all these diversities and still tried to figure out on how can we maximize or how can we operationalize the interoperability or legal interoperability between the diverse member state regimes. So I will very quickly take you through the solution that we have just proposed. Last year I spoke about it. This year I have it on slides. Sorry if they are too much populated. Hopefully next time when I come, I can share some success stories as well. So we created something that is called DCO interoperability mechanism for cross-border data flows. First thing that we did, we thought that the common foundations for bringing all the diverse member states together is to bring them on common principles. So we looked at a whole bunch of principles that are out there, and we did a global benchmark. We looked at all 16 DCO member states, looking at their personal data protection laws if they exist. Many DCO member states do not have them. And find the common principles and something that is acceptable and agreeable to all of them. Then we created what we call DCO principles for cross-border, DCO privacy principles. And because it was, so the other privacy principles that existed were from a few years ago, so we added the AI touch to these principles as well. So for example, as you would see, we distilled the principles down to 8 privacy principles for DCO member states. So data minimization is called data relevance now in the prospect of AI, and we have been very, very careful in choosing the word not to sound that we are compromising on the privacy. Similarly, data accuracy in the other principles, we called it data quality. again, in the prospects of emerging technologies, etc. And retention, for example, we call it storage limitation. So these are the names, but the principles are available on the DCO website. And we really invite you all to have a look and critically analyze if these principles are the best practices or not. So then, once we have defined the principles, we tried to create, looking at Ibero-American interoperability framework, ASEAN, CBPR, GDPR, we tried to create a framework where there's two-tiered approach. The first tier is getting all the member states to agree on the principles and operationalizing the interoperability through, and finding what we call accreditation, I'll come to it, and then developing model contractual clauses in the absence of such accreditation. So we went through the similar journey, looked at the model contractual clauses or standard contractual clauses. We created for the member states the best practice model contractual clauses. And finally, we organized this into what we call, or what we have started calling DCO interoperability mechanism. So it's two-tiered. Number one, again, we are working on the procedures to create the equivalence. I'm careful not to use the word adequacy, but to create the equivalence between the not like-minded, the equally mature regulatory regimes. And we would develop it through, for example, a council that would approve the accreditation of the member states. And in the absence of accreditation, we are developing the frameworks on how do we use the model contractual clauses to operationalize the cross-border data flows between the two member states. I think I have exceeded my time. I can go on and on about it because this was my last year's hard work, but I would be happy to answer any questions about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ahmed, for sharing with us the experience of the Digital Cooperation Organization on cross-border data flows, considering the economic and social values of data. I'm sure that the challenges on data interoperability is also a very important issue in Brazil. Also in the current discussion of the AI bill that is now in our parliament. Okay, so thank you so much for your contribution. And turning into Portuguese again.
Now I want to ask a question to Maria Kaskan. She's from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Estonia, and currently she is in the rotational presidency of Freedom Online Coalition. There is a coalition for a certain alliance for values and principles, democratic values and principles of technologies. And I want to ask you a question about the Estonian experience. We know that the digital government of Estonia is very well known, including in Brazil, is used as an example about digital transformation and how digital transformation can be consolidated for real benefits of the people. And based on your work, we would like to understand what are the practical ideas that the global majority countries can inspire, whether they are positive, especially the positive ones, and what should we avoid while we draft our own rules about data governance. Thank you.
So thank you very much. I'll try to keep my remarks short and simple. As I understand, the sooner we finish, the sooner we get to caipirinhas. Yeah, indeed, as you mentioned, Estonia truly is. We're quite well, being so small that we are, but we're still quite known in the world for our digital government. Pretty much anywhere we go, oftentimes when I say I'm from Estonia, people say, "Ah, you're the people with the great digital stuff." So yeah, I think of course it's mainly also because we were one of the first implementers of all of these different technologies, but hopefully it's also because we truly I think it's a model of it demonstrates how to really use public data effectively while actually maintaining strong privacy protection and citizens' trust. Yeah, in 2025, indeed, Estonia is the chair of the Freedom Online Coalition, which, as you mentioned, is a coalition of 42 member states, but also an advisory network, which is like a multi-stakeholder component. And as chair of the FOC, one of our main goals is to really share this knowledge that we have gained over the years and share our best practices. And we really hope this model can serve as an inspiration. And currently, as the chair of the Freedom Online Coalition, we're actually developing principles for rights-respecting DPI. And this is actually why we have also come here. My flight was only 30 hours. But yeah, we have gone all over the world pretty much to gather input to really see what is important in DPI and also see this from different perspectives around the world. So just a few words about Estonia's approach. First, I think two fundamentals, transparency and citizens having control over their own data. I think the practical application of having control over their own data is that, so DPI in Estonia really allows any individual, any citizen to see who has access to their data, who has access, if any official has looked at their data, who was it, when did they do it, like with a specific timestamp, why did they did it, etc. So it's essential data access logs. And as a citizen, you can always contest any unauthorized access, which I think is really also the key component in building accountability and trust. So I guess the lesson is here that countries should really drive to adopt very clear rules that give citizens agency over their own data and be able to demand transparency from public institutions. I think an interesting example I recently received from a colleague was that in unfortunately one global majority country, DPI was made compulsory, and yet the uptake was still extremely low, because I think if there is no trust, the citizens will find ways around it. So really trust is the key. So in Estonia, you can still access all kinds of different public services offline. You don't have to, it's not compulsory, you don't have to do it online. But people, they prefer it because it's simple, it's easy, and they trust it. So yeah, you can really build that trust if people know that they are in charge of their own data. Secondly, interoperability, another key issue. So Estonia has, some of you may have heard about it, we have this data exchange layer called the X-Road. So this really enables a kind of like seamless, secure data exchange, and it's not only between public institutions, but also private companies. And I think the key element here is that this is, the data exchange layer allows for data to be in different places. So say it's not the data is not centralized, and this of course reduces all kinds of different risks. So that's definitely a lesson for any country, wanting to develop DPI, that you should consider frameworks that allow data sharing with very strict security standards, and in trying to at the same time avoid kind of like monopolistic data control. And this, there was a lot of talk in the beginning also about minimization of data. So like one side of that is like not gathering different data. I think actually another side of the coin is that you also don't want to kind of repeat the same data in different servers, all right? So Estonia has this, what we call the once-only principle. So people give their data to the government one time only. So like one specific type of data is only kept in one database. Because there's no need to replicate the same data over different databases. And you know, if one database needs information from another database, it can get it by X-road. For example, as a citizen of Tallinn, you have free public transport, but the company that operates the public transport, they need to know that you are a citizen of Tallinn, right? But so they need to find out that you are registered indeed in Tallinn. However, this company, they don't need to ask for my address because the government already has my information. I have given my address to the government already. It's in the People's Registry. And so therefore, the company will kind of send an automated request to the People's Registry where the home address is already stored. And actually, moreover, it doesn't even need to get the specific address. All it needs to know is if I am a citizen of Tallinn or not. So it gets a 0 or a 1, a yes or no. So yeah, I think that's actually a very good example of data minimization. Of course, the big issue is that like there's no one size fits all. You know, every model needs to be kind of what's the word? Needs to be figured to the location of where it's gonna be used. So our success was also, of course, very dependent on the fact that we have such a strong infrastructure and we have a small population, etc. So the countries with you know less kind of digital readiness, they should first focus on the foundational elements. So for example, of creating this very strong legal framework for data privacy. Yeah, and I think I'm gonna finish with this point that by tailoring these principles of transparency, citizen empowerment, secure interoperability, you could really create really good data governments that gives people trust in that, and then they will actually use it. If you want people to use the system, they have to be able to trust this. And in the end, I think actually it comes really down to having also this political will to create the system that people can trust.
Thank you, Maria, for a very interesting example. We had the luck of receiving the Freedom Online Coalition for a workshop this week. It was very interesting to learn about this call, which I think is still open for the development of principles for respecting digital public infrastructure. But we had not heard these stories about the implementation in Estonia, which I think is very inspiring. Estonia has been a leader on this front for a number of years. Now, one thing that we discussed at that workshop is also the fact that very often digital public infrastructure is rolled out without a clear measurement target, on whether it was a good idea to implement it or not, and what were the objectives behind it. And this brings me to our next speaker, which exactly does projects to develop digital public infrastructure. So I will switch to Portuguese here. Yasodara Cordova.
Yesada Cordova is a member of the investment board. It's an investment board member of CoDevelop. It's a global fund with non-profit organizations, and it wants something that should be inclusive. And in this way, I ask you, when you evaluate these proposals, of implementing this public digital infrastructure, do you decide which projects will change the data use in this country? So the question is, what is this design principle that you have at Code Available that is non-negotiable? It's a mechanism of a responsibility mechanism that you have to approve before these investments in this public digital infrastructure to make sure that those data will get this inclusive development and protect people's rights. So if you could share the policy or any example, you can stay there or you can come here if you want. Well, good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with these amazing speakers and experts in the subject. It's always a pleasure to be at CPDP that has a huge relevance in Brazil. And I'm going to share a few ideas and impressions on how I evaluate the projects that I'm being part. I'm part of this co-develop evaluations, always observing that I'm a person that have a technical background and we have other people with different backgrounds evaluating the projects. And from my point of view, usually I don't hold I don't pay too much attention to principles. And why not? Because everyone likes it. If you talk about principles, who is in favor of the equality principle? Raise your hand. If someone is against, I'm gonna see it. So who in favor of the self-determination principle? Great. Privacy. See, no one is against any principle, and it's easy to describe a principle. I have some of them that I describe, and I had a board in my home office, and it's beautiful. The same when you have an application that we write the principles and we put them on a page, and everything is beautiful because you cannot. Everyone is going to agree. Who is going to wake up and say, "Today I'm going to develop an app that is not going to follow the equality principle"? It's is a digital public infrastructure, so no one will do that. So in my point of view, it is important. It's important for us to learn about them, to develop this critical sense, to evaluate those principles, but it's more important to transfer them in something that it's reachable. And when I see a project or an application, I think, so what is the technical component of this project that is going to avoid discrimination? Because I'm talking about equality principle. So if you agree with equality, what in your application, your app, it's going to avoid someone to be discriminated? And this is hard. This is hard to do. What in your app, I agree with privacy principle. Uh, what does it need for someone to lose its privacy? We need to expose this person, to expose its information. So what in your app it's going to compliance is important because you agree with those principles, but what it's going to avoid that those data to be shared in an illegal way. So you have different techniques that are going to avoid this from happening. So you can, for example, to do some cryptos, and of course that I'm being simple here. I'm simplifying, but one classic example that we have in Brazil, and also is a problem in other places, is we have lots of data in different data banks in different companies and other places, and those data banks, they are still leaking, and after the leak there is no coming back. If we get your name, your address, I love when central bank says, "Oh, don't worry, we leaked only the registration data." so what I'm looking are the technical components beyond the terms of privacy, use, and principles that are going to make sure that even though you have this interoperability in certain a specific platform or app, you will not be sharing this data with another person or organization that does not have the right to access this and doesn't have any commitment with the safety of those data, and especially when they were not part of the development of the platform. So this is the time when I'm looking at the projects, where I'm evaluating the projects that co-developed. And about accountability, I think it's important to take into account the country where it's being developed, the platform is being developed. Because in Brazil, we have a type of punishment and a type of answer to society. Maybe in another country is different. So it's good to know what's the country background, the type of framework that is being used to regulate for you to evaluate the project. Because I cannot apply a Brazilian principle in Malaysia, for example, an accountability principle. We need to respect when you understand the dynamic that is happening in certain countries. So I believe those are a few points that I take into account, and at least for me, there's no data that it won't be collected. We have been living the digitalization of everything, and all the information will be digitalized. All the data that will be digitalized, and it's their storage in a data bank. It's a economic value that it's there is not being used, and it's going to be in transfer where you have a transaction based on that data. And it's a reality that we need to understand that it's going to happen. There's no data bank that won't be digitalized. Say no, the information wants to be free. No, it wants to be free and digitalized. So this is a reality that we need to pay attention, and many times we need to be technical, because when we are going to translate the principle for a technical component, we need to make sure that this is going to correspond to what it's being established in that regulation. And that's it. I think this is what I want to say. Thank you. Thank you, Yasudara, for your contribution, and I think you brought an interesting point that is present in the discussions in Brazil in a general way, especially when we're talking about this artificial intelligence. That in fact, it's easier for us to only talk about principles. Of course, that we have the debate if we should have, it should have a principle legislation, and what is actually relevant is for us to be able to bring those principles in real situations. And if I can connect your speech with the Maria Cascan speak, I believe that the big challenge when we are talking about public digital structures and to make sure that this data will generate value, in fact, for the entire society, we do need to create this trust, digital trust. I believe that this is an important point, but maybe we cannot build this trust if we don't detail those guarantee and search for a consensus based on this concrete guarantee, bringing the principles for something that is real. So thank you for your excellent contribution. And now I have a question, passing the floor. It's also talking about artificial intelligence, and something that uh, people keep talking about not only in Brazil but the entire region and all over the world, that we are talking about data center. So I have a question for Fernanda Belchior, and I want her to talk a little bit about the Brazilian context, talking about AI. We have the debate. I'm going to name some news. Haddad minister said that he had a plan for 3 trillions, 2 trillion to attract data centers to Brazil. And I believe that the big debate that it's being done today, is that we know that we have many costs involved, especially environmental costs in this debate, in this type of investments. and at the same time we have benefits. So if you could share with us what type of concrete experience and type of benefits for this localities this type of investments that data center could bring. Thank you. Good afternoon. Once again, I would like to thank you for the invitation. I'm replacing our president. I'm going to do my best. So once again, thank you. I'm going to split my answer in two parts. First, the investments to attract this to Brazil. Brazil is the only country in G20 that had a matrix that is a green matrix. We are talking about Eletrobras that is going to generate more than 15 gigawatts of energy, and this is huge when we are talking about to be able to fulfill this, to fill up these data centers, especially the ones that are going to generate and process artificial intelligence. They will need a lot of energy, and we need not only we have an energy data bank for the energy bank for this, but we were able to increase this number of energy throughout the years, different from other countries that are already with this sustainable base. So for us to be able to attract these investments, not only to strengthen these players, the national players, but to bring investments from other regions, we have some taxations and regulatory issues that we need to improve this competitiveness. We have a lot of equipments that we acquired that we don't produce in Brazil that needs to come to this place, needs to come to the country easier when we are talking about the taxations. So the measures that Haddad mentioned needs to bring this attraction. The MyData that is still going on through the government, that we have the expectation that will be voted until still in this semester. It's going to bring not only this competitive environment and favorable environment, but also establish obligations for the data center operations, especially environmental objectives. So you need to have a data center that will be using specific technology of a cooling technology that will use it won't use a lot of water. Today, the data center, the state of the arts that are being built in Brazil and other regions of the world, they don't use this resource. Here at ELEA, today ELEA is a platform with 9 data centers in 5 different cities. We are present in São Paulo, Rio, that today are the main markets in Latin America. And today, I'm pretty sure that São Paulo represents 70 to 80% of all the data centers that we have when we are looking at Brazil. And we have approach to be in those important markets and in other different important markets regionally. And we are working with cooling technology of closed circuits, and we don't waste water. So I think that we have a question. We need to maximize this information on how of um, those tools that we are using and how they are using in a responsible way. Giving this example of our data center in Rio de Janeiro, today it's a state-of-the-art data center in terms of certifications, operation, and environmental constructions, and we do all the water use to capture the rainwater, and we are taking off to these areas, and we have a partnership with Colurb that clean the water, the streets, certain streets from Rio with this water that exceeded, so we don't waste any water. So I believe that the first part, I understand that we do have this fees and taxations, and we need to be competitive, but we do defend that these companies, once they are established in Brazil, and even the national companies that are going to create this framework to process those data, they need to follow those environmental laws, so we are able to create this long-term economy that will benefit the country. I think that this is the first thing. And talking a little bit your second questions, when we were talking about the data center role, when we are talking about how they can improve the data, when we are talking about the processing, the privacy. Our colleague was talking about Estonia and it's how to decentralize, and I believe that this is a very important item when we are thinking about strengthening this data, this local data processing, and you are going to generate an economy, you are going to stimulate this regional economy, and it go against this centralization when we are thinking about the interoperability, when we think about in the highest governance and generating value with those data, it doesn't help. So we do need, in fact, to have the decentralized data. And last year, uh, many of you lived or knew that what Porto Alegre suffered with the rains, and we have two data centers in Porto Alegre, and we had many clients and many companies, not clients from LA, that were isolated with those TIs. They had their production environment flooded by the water, and we saw how important it is to have a data center. They were connecting those critical moments, this data processing of those government and hospitals, and they were getting the information of energy networks that need to generate their products to keep the information going.
And we managed to make these companies go to our data centers and be able to process the environments that were totally floated underwater, and they could continue their business. If we didn't have a decentralized infrastructure, I believe this is one of the assumptions, and how the data center becomes an enabler in this maturity that we want for the data processing, we wouldn't be able to create a governance and a long-term strategy for this to happen. And I think I went over my time here. I'm sorry. So, but if I could uh, give my 2 cents here, is that the decentralization of the infrastructure will be the framework to help this continuity, business continuity, and efficient data management. It's very good to hear this perspective of minimization of pollution, and that is totally aligned with the idea of recognizing that I produce value, and I'm aligned with the value of society. And I see a parallel with the data mining and the data collection. But it alludes to the idea of compensating the players and the companies that are setting themselves apart and not finding efficiency as the last parameter in the market. The same way that, for example, is workers' unions is claiming the rights of the workers, there will be exploitation, and because of the exploiting the environment, if there is no tension to the minimization of the effects in the environment. Now I will move to another ecosystem, because Fernanda, you mentioned that you transfer these values to the partners that use these data centers, and I think there is a connection to what happens in other more digital ecosystem, not physical ecosystem. There is the system of Mercado Libre as a marketplace, and Pablo, you have already applied the data protection law in Argentina, and now you guide Mercado Libre how they use e-commerce data all over Latin America. Following the spirit of our talk about data governance for the development and democracy in the global majority, I want to understand how the big platforms and the regulators can stimulate the local ecosystem and the innovation of small and medium companies, and at the same time guarantee the control on the personal data of the holders. Thank you. His microphone is not working. Okay. I will try to speak Portuguese, and thank you for the opportunity. I will switch to Spanish because it will be more comfortable for me, because I have a bad Portuguese, and I'm not going to embarrass my team that is looking at me right now. So let's switch to Spanish. I think that the question is really important, especially if we connect with the title with the conference about data governance for developments and democracy in the global majority. And I would like to focus on my experience because I was lucky enough to participate in the Argentinian regulator body for 15 years, and then I jumped to the other side of the fence, and I developed a data privacy program for a company that allows and facilitates the compliance with the data governance mechanisms. And I consider taking into account all these experience that a proactive relationship between the platforms and the regulator bodies is not only convenient but also necessary. It is necessary to have a collaboration among the platforms and between the platforms and the regulators. Without trying to exhaust the discussion, I would like to say that we need at least three pillars. Of course, there are more pillars, but I would like to focus on three fundamental pillars in this proactive relationship connected to assume shared principles and not prescriptive principles. What happens with prescriptive principles is because they get outdated very quickly because of the pace in the advance of technology. And besides that, the data protection rules and the information governance, they cross horizontally all the economy of a country or a region. And that makes it even more difficult to find a rule that can satisfy all the industries. There is no one size fits all in the prescriptive rules. If we co-create principle-based rules where the regulators or the policymakers can tell us the expected results and what they expect from us, and we, the ones that administer, we can try to find ways to reach those results, and we can have accountability because the how needs to be flexible enough in order to reach this place from our own experience and our own participation in our activity. The second pillar of this collaboration needs to be the understanding of the technology in a double role of a facilitator of rights from one side. And I want to mention an example. We enabled a data privacy center in our platform that allows an interactive dashboard that allows the user to control their own information, their rights, and so on. They can select their preferences and how we can communicate with them, the security options that they have available, and we facilitate their rights automatically without having to consult the bureaucracy. And the result was the empowerment of our users. And we went from servicing 10,000 users to bring more than 1 million rights in only 6 months. And this is reflected in our report of transparency that we published every semester. Through technological tools, we could multiply the exercise of the rights and the data protection culture of our users. And we brought AI to prevent frauds and identity thefts in the platform or somebody who could pretend to be someone else. So the technology was at the service of protecting our users. And the last pillar, the last facilitation that technology allows us is to facilitate the opportunities. The anonymous use and the accumulated use of information allows the generation of tools that we bring to small businessmen and business people that was things that were only suitable for big companies, and we could democratize the information, and a small handicrafted man could, from a small city, could recognize their products from miles away from where they live. And the third pillar that in this collaboration that was mentioned in the previous panel is the importance of having the regulatory sandbox, this place of shared experimentation where academia, civil society, government, the regulators, and platforms, we can experiment in a controlled environment and evaluate the implications of the impact of these technologies politically and socially. And that allows us to build regulations based on evidences, which is much better than doing out of speculation and out of fear and being policies by fear. And this would be my first participation in this part of the panel. Thank you once again. Thank you, Pablo, for your interesting talk. I would highlight that these needs of cooperation between platforms and regulators that you mentioned, this is included in a paradigm of co-regulation, cooperation, and responsive regulation. That is a term that is being used here in Brazil. And I want to highlight that in this framework that you mentioned, the idea that we need to have technological tools to implement rights. And certainly we have some theoretical formulations dealing with that, but seeing that in practice and understanding this on dashboards and tools that is being used in practice are very interesting. So thank you very much for your contribution. Now I want to pass the floor to Cecilia Recap, who is the professor of the University College of London. And here we are talking about digital sovereignty again, and there is something, a topic that is permeated this conference and this debate. And the question that I would like to ask you is that your work analyzes how the global technological companies capture the value of data and the knowledge. Under this political and economic perspective, what are the political measures as industrial strategies and public databases and regional alliances that the countries of global majority could adopt to try to keep these economic benefits of their own data? That many times we see that they flow to big foreign companies, and we would like to hear your contribution about what concrete measures we could think of. Thank you. Hello, I would like to start talking about these asymmetries, the asymmetries to access the data. Pablo was talking about Mercado Libre and how I, as an individual consumer, can have access to my own consumption, and this is true, but I cannot have access to a general consumption of all the Argentines or all the people who are in Latin America. This access to generalized data allows the companies as Mercado Libre, and especially the big companies, the digital companies in the United States and China, not only to process this data with algorithms to throw oil in your platforms, but to create a digital ecosystem besides the immediate platforms. For example, Mercado Libre use your data for their electronic commerce, for their fintech. So this crossing of data is not accessible, not even for the same producers and not even for the citizens who are sitting in this room. But when we talk about asymmetry, it's not only about the data and the access to data that I insist once again, they are produced collectively. It's not only about the individual data that doesn't have an added value, but the more data bigger the need to have a powerful algorithm, artificial intelligence to process and give meaning to this data. And it is indispensable to have digital infrastructure, physical infrastructure, data centers, satellites, cables. When we look at the system globally and thoroughly, and from this point we can think about how to expand the digital sovereignty, what we find is that there are a bunch of companies that control this ecosystem. And if you do not think about integrated solutions, and many times policies that seem progressive, they will be regressive. And here I'm going to allude to the Haddad's policy of data centers and the general promotion policies of data centers, because here in Brazil this is being discussed.
And why, how they are being presented this policy, we have three reasons why it's not going to expand this digital sovereignty in Brazil. This promotion, because it's unrestricted, especially with this important taxation to install the data center. The trying to install data centers in our territory doesn't mean we are going to be democratic with some economies. It's going to continue to be prisons and spaces where we cannot have access, although we are lucky to access our own data, our own individual data, but not the group of data that is stored there. And we can say that when we install the new data center in the local territory, it's easier for the government to regulate. So how much a periphery government can have the capacity to govern a big company, as for example, they already said that they are going to invest billions to install data center in Brazil as Microsoft and Amazon. And the second point, I think it's important to put here the complexity of the data center installations here, because the second point is that the data center, they have a big social environmental impact. Social environmental is not only the use of water and energy, but it's going to impact the communities that are around these data centers. In Chile, for example, the Ministry of Science created something that is going to map 80 social environmental variables with the data center. Energy and water are two of them, and when we consume more water because we have more energy, so if we can use this for data center, why not using to transform the transport system for them to work based on renewable energy? Another problem that is associated is the Chevron paradox. So more centers and more pressure to migrate to the cloud, more pressure we will have that would be that we had before. And how the data only have value when they have these big data banks. What is already happening many times is that massive process of migrating to the cloud, all of those companies with the promise that this is going to generate value for the companies that are using this, and without a question, it's going to generate this huge bill to pay every month with Amazon and Google, including Mercado Livre, in this data center of these companies. And the first problem, the other problem that this type of policies, the data center will not generate this digital sovereignty that's different from the forms that we could have any doubts and questions on the previous form of that we used to say is not going to generate anything, because an active data center you have 50 employees per building and is not going to generate any value in the productive chain, because we know that parts of the solutions are imported. So it's better to create a research center to produce models and local technology than installing more and more data centers. So for me, it seems that we want to apply, even though when we advance it in this industrial policy, we're still thinking about the industrial capitalism and not the digital, and we don't know what we have to take into account. I'm not saying that we don't need data centers in Brazil and Argentina, but I'm going to give 5 proposals because I don't have much time. There are proposals that are interrelated, and they don't seem to be enough. And of course, that we have a lot to develop in many of them. The first one is a data agency to define in a public manner the different actors in a democratic way. What are the data that can be collected or not? Who can use those data and how? And also to apply that fee if that it's going to be used when we are talking about this big data concentration, a consortium of public companies that will develop this interconnected and digital solutions. And Uruguay has a public company that has two public data centers, and they are thinking about giving this digital services for the entire administrations. Brazil also have public communication companies, but they only built one layer on top of this, and they chose to do that instead of building this collective. And third, it's an interdisciplinary study, and I want to insist on this because who is here know is not only about bringing together talents to get the AI, local AIs. We need to understand the social, economic, and political impacts of those models. Fourth place, this public marketplace. If the governments have the digital infrastructure in public data centers, what the government will be able to do is that in those data centers, they are going to, as the private companies have, as Amazon or Google, the public companies are also going to be able to get a public marketplace as Mercado Livre, but public. And why not the state or different states? We have institutions here. We have the capability here, but maybe we would be able to do everything local, and we need to think about this representativity of this localizations. Why not having as this public data center for these digital services that they will not ask them for this, but we need to understand that we need to think as the private companies do. The state cannot decide if the technology will be bought or not. Doesn't mean that we won't be advancing in this. We won't deny the companies from putting their data in Microsoft or Google. This means that the state can do that. The private company, it's in its rights. They can decide what is the new services that they're going to use. But if the government wants to advance in this digital sovereignty, that cannot do that without those companies. And this is not only the possibility to better use its states, but also using the best technology, as this technology, how this technology is chosen, and how those informations will be used. Thank you. Cecilia, many ideas and many proposals. That's why we like to have uh, this conversations, and it's important to have this interdisciplinary talks. The proposal that you said about having this install interdisciplinary data centers to foster the local community could be an exchange of those investments. And I think that this should be the path how to stimulate this local ecosystem, not only thinking about the industry, but to recognize that we have other values. But one thing that you mentioned, Chile, that has this different dimensions, different layers of criteria that they consider to install data center in their country and evaluate this data center installations. And this brings me the opportunity to pass the floor for our last speaker, that is from Chile, Maria Paz Hermosilla. She's a professor from the University Adolfo Ibanez, but the director of GovLab, that has many works about this algorithm transparency, public algorithm of the government, and this national strategy of artificial intelligence. So based on their experience, I would like to understand, basically consider that Chile It's testing these open algorithms, the group of data with public interests and ethic for the use of artificial intelligence. What rules, tools, and cultural changes combinations show to be more effective to transform the governmental data into social benefits, concrete, and that will generate this public trust. So what lesson can be taken from Chile experience and be used in other countries of the global majority? Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for this great event. The first time is my first time here and I loved it. One main lesson that I like to share would be the possibility to advance in those mechanisms using their own public agencies. So, for example, the universities that the public mechanism has to guide how a product or a service is bought in the country. So we have this public procurement does that in our country. We use this structure and we create with them this artificial intelligence that includes standards and ethical regulations. So if I want to ask for an algorithm that has no bias and from a supplier that is going to provide service to the government, I can incorporate this in my binding, my contract, in my reference terms. And what I'm talking about is logic. When we think about Chile and using this responsible artificial intelligence beyond data protection, this was different and we are not using it, and we are thinking how we are going to advance, because the public mechanism that allows us to advance as we are following the data protection that are being used is not that we didn't foster this legislation. We have this GOB Lab sitting on our meetings twice a week, sharing its time until the legislation until we approve this legislation. We don't have to doubt it, we have to normalize it, but we can advance with other regulatory mechanisms, and we are able to get external funding. So we told the procurement, so you're going to fund this. No, we knock on the door of the international bank, and we went to this procurement. We went to the digital government. We get the manual to get this projects, and they did this with our own help. So the government now owns this product, and we need to empower the government for that. And with this transparency, we worked 3 years with this, and we are able to get this algorithm from the transparency legislation to be published. They wanted that instruction, and we would change this in this political council. Uh, they were doubting this, but we had the recommendations that were published last year. So we have an example that we are able to advance with this existing um, universities that are not legal or judicial up to now, but between 2024 and 25 we published this, and this is available in this algoritmospublicas.cl platform. We have 3 algorithms that are open. We created 3 AI projects with 9 public services, and there are tools that are available so the public agencies are able to evaluate the risk of its projects. In this binary classification projects, they are able to measure the projects and make it possible for the models to be transparent. So you have a list of transparencies that can be fulfilled, and all of this is done using the tools we have without depending on the legislation. But in parallel, how we did 3 specific reform in this data protection legislation, we are waiting what is going to be the implementation of that.
This is one recommendation: external funding, and with existing mechanisms that are already in the mandates of the public norms and the public bodies, and now the cultural change. How did we do that? We did that with the public managers that we had qualified all over the years. From one program, we trained public administrators and more than 100, and they were our partners to implement all these. And I would say that we from the university, we have an important role of training of these civil servants in order for them to lead these issues in their own work. And this is what I would say. Now, about the data pools and the integrated data infrastructure or integrated database, administrative database and research that are available safely. They are not open. We had less progress in terms of showing results to you. The Ministry of Social Development has an integrated database that is available to scholars, but the research that was made with this database didn't demonstrate, we didn't see the concrete effects in the public policies. And in this regard, I wouldn't say that we have a lot of lessons that we can learn from Chile about the use of integrated data in order to improve the public policies. In fact, that in the region, we do have a lot to learn about that. The countries that we are looking is New Zealand, UK, and Uruguay, with the creation of the integrated system of statistical registration. But I don't know if they created a public database from this registration. One thing is to create them, and the other thing is to create value with that. But about the integration of administrative data and the use of this data, that is another issue that we are working on in Golf Lab. I don't know if we do have lessons to share about this. Thank you. Thank you very much, Maria, for your excellent and intriguing contribution. And I think this is the big topic that we are discussing in Brazil, and how the algorithms used by the public body and how we can have different guidelines. And I believe this is a great debate, and I was very curious to see the guidelines of bidding processes that is used in Chile. I think we had the questions and interesting answers, and I want to thank you from now on. And I will pass the floor now to the audience to see if the audience has questions. Any questions or comments to our panelists? We still have time for at least 3 questions. We still have 10 or 15 minutes. And my proposal is we can get a round of questions and everyone can answer at once. Thank you. I want to congratulate the panel and the organization of the panel. I have learned a lot, and I'm going to ask my question in Spanish. I'm from the University of Argentina, and I have a question to Maria Paz in Spanish. I really liked what you said about the training of people in the talent retention. How do you make these people continue working and continue contributing to this work of public policies in the government and avoid them from going to the private sector to work there? Well, we do not retain people because we are a university. They really leave the public service. Some of them, we have projects that are not continuous, and there are some students that go to the public service, and we have 3 internal champions that left, and they went to the public defender's office, and now they act as our partner. But I would say that there is a layer of middle management in Chile that is motivated to improve the public management, and we have to empower these people. The practical communities were really useful. The government's left created the public spaces where these innovators gather, and they make the bottom-up movements of innovation as well. And I believe this type of place, it's not, if it they're not in the national government, and if the university can support this type of work, it is also a way to support this transformation of the state. But for example, a civil servant or a public manager lasts 3 years and then they leave. This is sad, but I'm talking about the top management until the heads of division, and not besides that. They usually stay for 3 years. I would like to ask a question to Fernanda about the data centers, because one of the concerns that we observed in the government now is the necessity of energy to cool, for cooling, not so much the water, but we know that the water is contained, but our concern is about the cooling. And in Alessandro's comment yesterday, and he mentioned that today we have an excess of 15 gigawatts of energy. But as far as I know, in the public data, this energy is during the daylight, because the photovoltaic power and the wind power, and because of that we have this localized surplus, and the data centers need to work during the day and during the night. So how do you think about the cooling of data centers in a hot city as Rio de Janeiro? It's perfectly understandable in Santiago or Buenos Aires that have longer cold periods in the existence of data centers. But cities as Rio de Janeiro, this is something that worries us. I would like to hear a comment on that. Yeah, in partnership with the city, recently we announced a city of data centers, the Rio AI City, that as the first phase has 1.5 gigawatts, and we are going to reach 3.5 gigawatts. And the idea is to run workloads of clouds and artificial intelligence. I'll bring some points here. Well, the constant is the non-obsolescence of equipment and innovation and connectivity. So both the public sector and the collocation and providers and the manufacturers are working for the equipment to be more and more efficient, and you can use this energy in a rationalized way. When we talk about some specific applications, the extremely cold data centers that we saw some years ago will not be needed necessarily now. So you can use an efficient energy. And now we can reach rates of efficiency that is much better, and the applications not necessarily will need to have these environments that are extremely cold. And it's important to say that besides Brazil having this supply that is abundant, the market is looking at an exponential demand. Nobody is saying that this is otherwise. It's different from what we saw 10, 12 years ago with the advent of clouds, that we didn't have the size of racks so thickens as we are going to need for artificial intelligence workloads nowadays. But at the same time, the technology is moving so we can work more efficiently. And I want to launch this provocation here, is that the investments will come. Artificial intelligence will happen all over the world. My question is, what is the place that Brazil wants to occupy? Do you want to be protagonist, or we don't want to be protagonist? I think we do have the potential. MyData is one of the examples. We are personally working, Eleo and other competitors, for this wording to be as responsible as possible. And I think the issue of national reserve and the energy efficiency and the water efficiency is in the draft, and the data center is focused on infrastructure, but also is a base for us to make the digital ecosystem to grow. In the Rio AI City, we are going to build the data centers. We are working with the city to bring research institutes and labs from big techs to bring a labor market and foster the labor market inside the city of Rio with a value capital, a human capital that is extremely qualified. The construction of the data centers that are in the middle or long term creates a lot of jobs, and There is something that we cannot look at only the operation and say that the data center is 15 or 30 people working. There is a whole chain of jobs that we can stimulate. And when we look at these high density and sustainable data centers, we have to work with the energy, as I exemplified. But I wanted to use your question to bring this other information, that it is a possibility to create value and generation of value, that we start in the infrastructure and we go to the workloads and the software, and we can create an innovation ecosystem. This is our proposal. We started as a platform that uses 100% of renewable and certified energy. We have these commitments as a purpose, and that way that we want to continue making economy, and we want to articulate with private and public interest to find the entities and the research and work with the manufacturers in order for us to have equipment that give back an efficient that is intelligent and economical to us. The private sector is capitalist, but it's not smartly saying we cannot use raw material irresponsibly. This is going to come back to us. So we have a unique moment to work together, and we advocate that protagonizing this enables us to grow in other layers. There's no other way. I invite everyone to make this reflection, because we are in a perfect time to market in Brazil. Perfect, great optimism. Thank you. With this optimism would be perfect to conclude, but even more perfect, we can have one last question with Professor Luca. I'm going to ask a question, and I'm going to use my time to conclude the conference. I really liked the presentations because they illustrate very interestingly how we are ahead of the systems. We have the systems of AI and digital ecosystems, and this is a point that we highlight in the digital about data sovereignty, that we don't need to look at data center algorithm, the data, but the group of things. And then my question is something that makes me nervous and worried, because we don't see a lot of examples of countries that manage to develop an institutional framework to look at this complexity. I liked Cecilia's suggestions about the data agency. There is no data agency in the world. Only in China there is an agency that stimulates the data trade, and it is the agency that the super digital regulator. But in other countries, what is the institution that understands the functioning of data and data centers and algorithms and education, that can also regulate and create fostering policies? We don't have that right now. I was really excited when in the beginning of the year the government has announced that they are going to create this inter-ministry committee for a digital platform, but this could be an embryo of something that could create this synergy. But it was announced in the third year of mandate for next year. So we cannot bring these digital platforms. I'm sorry that I'm too long, and this is part of my conclusion actually. And can you share an example, a concrete example, even in the private sector? Because that would be good for those who develop data centers, who develop the marketplace. What type of institution would be good to understand the complexity of the digital ecosystem that is ahead of us, and how to regulate efficiently in a sovereign way, but in a way to empower the citizens of the country and to stimulate innovation and competition? Are we desperate, or is there any good example that can be used, or a best institutional practice? An easy question. Yes, exactly. There is none, because we are facing unseen transformations If we try to regulate with the same tools and the same legal framework that we inherited from a different time of capitalism, we are going to fail systematically. I talk to people in different governments, and the necessity is okay, give me an example where this works. Give me an example where this works well. I wish there was one, but if this example existed, we wouldn't be in an unequal world as the one that we are living. We we are even more underdeveloped, and the United States became closer to Latin America. It's because they are worse, not because we are better. There is no example, but that does not mean that in the states, in the civil society, in the universities, we cannot create one. That's why I talk about the institutional creativity. We cannot have an institutional creativity just not only to create a magical bullet to solve all the problems, but since it is an ecosystem problem, we need an ecosystem of different institutions. Of course, that we can base in some of the existing ones, and that's why I was talking about Antel. That is a public telecommunications company that is responsible for 95% of the households in Uruguay to have internet connection. We cannot say the same of the other countries in Latin America, but this is not enough. We have to transform Antel in a digital company to bring the services of the state. An example of Chile is another development of public capacities inside the Ministry of Science. And if you are interested in that, there is a lecture that we organize in the institute with people from different spaces and different business. That's why I have the details of the case. I don't think they are the only ones, but what is the problem of that? If we are advancing in the government, other parts of the government decide to increase the minimum thresholds required by the company to present a sustainability report.
And when you elevate this concentration of toxic substance or problematics, the data center were excluded of the need to present this report. So they advance in one hand, but they go backwards in another hand. That's why we don't have this ecosystemic point of view. And the last thing I want to say that for many reasons, this type of solutions need to be inserted in a complex, geopolitical complex framework, and uh, we cannot allow that only one government bring magical solutions even though they are part of society. We need this ecological perspective to minimize the needs of data centers and to understand where they are necessary and where they should be to maximize the potentially of this use for different countries, because we do have the need of having these talents for those public initiatives and to produce models that after that will be published and of open use. And of course we need more regional integration. I think that we have two keywords of the event. Armando, I think you want to answer, and after that, Pablo, and then we wrap up. Well, as you mentioned, it's not a magic solution. There's no institution that would be a universal solution to solve all the government's problem that might appear external or internally. It's an ecosystemic problem, but we do have to take two things into account. The first, what do we call sovereignty and what we call public, because what is it's right for the Dominican Republic, it's not going to be the same for Argentina or Brazil. So thinking like that, we need to start understanding what are the common points we need to go around in the coordinated way for towards the direction that we want to continue to follow to develop those ecosystems that will be right for each region. And in Dominican Republic, in local level, what we are trying to articulate since the perspective maybe in this sovereignty, but a little bit beyond that, when we are talking about how we are going to articulate the digital investments, starting from the same state, talking about the needs that we have, and from that we are able to define what are the work lines when we are talking about digital public infrastructure, public software, and services that will be built throughout from that. And also we need to define this connectivity and infrastructures. What are the needs, the future needs of the state due to these questions? And from that, strategically, we need to open the door to different types of partnerships and use of technologies that will allow us to get to the point where we want. And this should be inside the regulatory framework that allow us to channel those investments to generate this proper results, even though we don't have this sovereignty. We need the digital autonomy that allows us to do what we wanted. It is a complex, and it's of course that we need to dedicate ourselves to that. But we first need to understand what is the base that we are starting, where are we starting, and everyone is talking about the same thing when we are talking about this. In the private sector, the contribution that I can give to this debate is that in the private sector, we can collaborate, giving data about the impact of this regulation work and what this can generate. But talking about the value of those data from a different approach, and not saying what is the price of this, but the impact that the data has. I can say that the value of the data of a user, or I can restructure this question and ask what's the logistic value of this network from this user location, allow the companies to be more efficient to deliver a product and compete as equals with big commercial stores. I can also say, I can also talk about this collaboration approach when we are trying to understand the opportunities that the data will generate. For example, this alternative data. For example, if only this financial data are used, we are going to exclude those people that do not have access to a bank. And this will not have this systematic inequality from a region, but we are working with alternative data. And for example, in the case of Mercado Livre, that was something that was questioned here in this panel. Understanding what are the capabilities that people has, understanding this reputation inside the ecosystem is going to allow this person to access credit. This person are able to see it in this traditional way. I want to end up talking about the data that are able to dimension, to measure those solutions. We can contribute to solve systematic problems in our regions. Around 600 small and medium companies are selling through our platforms. 2,000 families has as our main sustain the revenue that they got from Mercado Livre. But half of the small companies that work with Mercado Livre access their first credit is from the Mercado Pago. One in every 5 leaders, company leaders, it's led by women, and more than 5,800 or civil organizations are funded throughout Mercado Livre. I want to invite you all to access the report of sustainability report that it's in mercadolivre.com. We give you this information so you can know with real data we can contribute for the private sector. I want to know the number of data that Mercado Livre has. What percentage of those credits were for consumption and the productive? One we used to reunite outside and the technical support and logistic that were working for 2 days. They need to rest, and I want to thank you, all of you, and also the team that stayed here working 24/7, and a hand of applause for all of them. Also, I'd like to thank you, the CTS team, Ana Beatriz, Walter, the whole team that work in the digital and marketing communication. And thank you, Lucas, that was a great partner as always. I just want to invite all of you that stayed here until 6 4 for the last day. Tomorrow we have a side event that this year's was particularly a great success because we need to stop the enrollments because we didn't have space for everybody. So everyone that was part of the CPDP LatAm, especially you that are here, you have as a present the possibility to be part of our side event about AI safety from the global majority. It's going to have the whole day tomorrow, many presentations. We're gonna talk about the case studies as some of our sponsors, some of our supporters, and I want to thank you, particularly thank you for the sponsors, the supporters, the institutional supporters, the partners from other organizations that are here with us that allow us every year. And the greatness of CPDP, the agenda is defined for the participants. So I want to ask a hand of applause for everyone. Every year I say, or you are great liars, or everybody is liking the conference. Consider that most of you are not lawyers. I think you're being honest and you really like the conference. So once again, I'd like to thank all of you. Thank you, the participants here. And I'd invite all of you to come back tomorrow and to come back next year. Thank you.